Thank you for tuning in to Redeeming Time. Today's broadcast is going to be dedicated to Stephen Berry Jr. He's in the Army. He's presently serving in Iraq. His grandparents, you may know, are Dave and Audrey Doggett. They're presently living up in Auburn. If you'd like to give a word of encouragement to Steve Berry and to those people who are there serving with him in Iraq, you can contact me at pastorvale@aol.com or by Post Office Box 648 Gray. I will be more than happy to pass the information on to them. Stephen, I just want you to know that folks are praying for you. We care about you. We thank God for you and the people that you're serving there with. And you're in our hearts and prayers and appreciation. We've been looking here at the book of Jonah and thinking about Jonah. And in Jonah in chapter 1 it says this. It says, "Now the word of the Lord came unto Jonah, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it, for the wickedness has come up before me." First thing we see in verse 1, verse 2, is God's patience. Nineveh was a wicked city, and the question that rises up naturally from reading this is, why didn't God just go ahead and judge them? Why would he have somebody go and tell them that the judgment was coming? But the fact is very simple and very obvious. 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 9 makes it very clear. God isn't willing that anyone should perish, but his desire is that all men would come to repentance. Therefore, he's long-suffering. God wants people to be saved, and God wanted the people of Nineveh to have that opportunity to come to know him and be delivered from the judgment that was certain to come. So we see God's patience, but then we've seen God's prophet. God's prophet, Jonah. Very interesting what he did after God called him to go to Nineveh. It says here, verse 3, "But Jonah rose up to flee unto Tarsus from the presence of the Lord, and went down to Joppa." I think it's very interesting to note that Jonah rose up to flee from the presence of the Lord. Now think about it. Jonah knew Jehovah God was the creator of all things. He made everything. There wasn't anything that God didn't make, and that God is everywhere present at the same time. He had to know that he could not escape from the very presence of God. Psalm 139 make that very obviously very clear. And in fact, Psalm 139, if you'll read it, you'll find the beginning of Psalm 139 was written when David was trying to be on the run from God. He was trying to run from God, and he realized there's no place that I can go but what God isn't there. He said it's something like this in verse 7 of Psalm 139. He said, "Where shall I go from your spirit, or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend up into heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in the grave, behold, you're there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there shall your hand lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely darkness shall cover me, even the night shall be light about me. Yea, the darkness hideth not from thee, but the night shineth as the day, and the darkness and the light are both alike to thee." He's saying, look, there's no place that I can go from your presence. There's no way that I can get out from, go to any place where you're not, that you don't know where I am. So what was Jonah trying to do? It says here he was trying to flee from the presence of the Lord. Now, he was a prophet of God. He knew that God was everywhere present at the same time. So it had to have a more significant meaning. And what it was saying was that Jonah realized what God wanted him to do, and Jonah fled from the presence of the Lord. In this respect, Jonah tried to move himself so far away from where he was supposed to be that God could not use him to accomplish that task. Jonah was on the run from God, and he tried to run away from God. And I think it's interesting that when we run from God, the direction is always a downward spiral. Notice this in the text. If you have your Bible, you'll note something very interesting. It said in verse 3 that he went down to Joppa. And then later on, you see in verse 5, he went down into the sides of the ship. And then you go on and you see in chapter 2 and verse 6, and after he was tossed into the sea, into the fish, and then it says he went down into the bottom of the mountains of the earth. He went down, down, down the direction. The only direction it is when we run from God is always a downward spiral. And his situation got worse. You know, when we run from God, our situation, rather than getting better, it'll only get worse. His situation became so bad that he described his circumstances in verse 5 of chapter 2. He said, "The waters compassed me about, even to the soul. The depth closed me round about. The weeds were wrapped about my head." Can you imagine what it would be like to be swallowed up by a great fish? And here you are inside the belly of that great fish, and you have no light, absolute darkness, and you have water cold slashing all around you, and you're all tied up with seaweeds and all this other slimy junk, and there you are captivated in this terrible, terrible situation. Our situation when we begin running from God only gets worse and worse and worse and worse. Now, the good news is that when he finally had reached the bottom, it was there that it says in chapter 2 and verse 1, it says, "Then Jonah prayed." It seems odd that we have to come to the bottom sometimes in our life before we will cry out to God. But it was then that Jonah cried out to the Lord. And the good news is, when he bottomed out, then he cried out unto the Lord. The good news is, it says, "I cried by reason of mine affliction unto the Lord, and he heard me." God will hear us. God doesn't want us to be running away from him. He loves us. And his plans for us are for good and not for evil. He knows what is best. We need to comply and obey and trust him accordingly. But he cries out. And if we, wherever we are, will turn to him, the Lord will hear us, provided we're not too late. It said in chapter 2 and verse 7, it said, "When my soul fainted within me, I remembered the Lord." He had finally run out of gas. He had finally quit fighting. And it was only when he quit fighting that God could get a hold of his heart and his mind. I read this just recently. It said, a drowning boy was struggling in the water. On the shore stood his mother in agony of fright and grief. By her side stood a strong man, seemingly indifferent to the boy's fate. Again and again did the suffering mother appeal to him to save her boy, but he made no move. By and by, the desperate struggle of the boy began to abate. He was losing strength. Presently, he arose to the surface weak and helpless. At once the man leaped into the stream and brought the boy in safely to the shore. "Why did you not save my boy sooner?" asked the now grateful mother. "Madam, I could not. As long as he struggled, he would have dragged us both to certain death. But when he grew weak and ceased to struggle, then it was easy to save him." It is when we cease from our own works and depend helplessly upon Christ that we realize how perfectly able he is to save without any aid from us. If we're on the run from God today, let's stop the run, turn to him, and know, no matter how far you've gone down, that he'll hear. Somebody said it this way: sin will take us farther than we want to go. It will keep us longer than we want to stay, and it will cost us more than we want to pay. My heart's desire and prayer for all of those in this community of Gray and New Gloucester and the surrounding area is that God will bless each and every one according to your need and his wisdom. My heart's desire for you, Stephen, and for your friends is for God's preservation, God's protections, and God's blessings and anointing upon each one of you where you are right there today, as well as upon your families. And I would also remind everyone, hopefully we'll remember this one thing. If we don't remember anything else, always remember to cast all your care upon him, because he cares for you.